Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. I'm Marilyn, and in today's video, we're going to make a fabric basket. Now, I've made several of these and I've learned some tips and tricks along the way. I'm going to share those with you today. Basically, we are going to start with what I'm going to use as an outside fabric, this beautiful floral, and my liner. And I have this weird obsession with polka dots. You can probably see that. So I just like to use this as my lining fabric. Now I'm going to cut 2 pieces out of the floral and 2 pieces out of the polka dot. And the template that I'm using, you start with an 8" by 8" square of the fabric. You're going to cut 2 out of the lining, 2 out of the outside, and then you cut a 2" block out of the bottom corner here and a 2" block out of the bottom corner here. Now, if you are using a directional fabric, it's important that those come out of the bottom. Now, for lining this or for interfacing this, on the lining fabric, I could use a Shapeflex 101. That gives it a little bit of sturdiness, a little bit of structure, or I also have some that I get off of Amazon. For the outside fabric, I like to use this fusible fleece. It gives it very nice structure. Now on this basket, I actually use fusible fleece on all 4 pieces. On this basket, I used it just on the outside, and then I used a thinner lining on the inside. That works well as well. Other things that I'll use. I have a wool pressing mat. I have a mini iron. If you want to use something like this to cut the 2" corners out, that can be helpful. I have a ruler. I have a rotary cutter. I have my scissors. I always have little snips, and hopefully I don't have to use it, but I also have a seam ripper. I'm also going to use my Old Faithful sewing machine, purple thread, and sewing clips. If you don't like to use sewing clips, pins are perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get my material prepped, get the interfacing on the back, and I'll meet you at my sewing machine. I have all my fabric ready to go. I cut the fabric out on my laser, then I went ahead and added the fusible fleece to the back, a little bit larger piece, pressed it on, and then I used the fabric, a ruler, and a rotary cutter to cut around it. I also have my lining pieces, and on the back of that, I have that other interfacing. What I want to do is put pretty side of the outside fabric to pretty side of the other piece of outside fabric. We're going to line them up really nicely. And then I'm going to put clips at the top and then down in these corners, because I'm going to sew here, here, and here. So I'm going to keep my clips out of the way. What I'm going to use is the side of my presser foot to have a 3/8" seam allowance. If you want to make it larger, you can, but you want to stay consistent on all 3 sides for your seam allowance. You also want to make sure that you're consistent between this piece and your lining piece. But for me, I'm going to line it up right here. Now, I didn't think it really mattered if you did any back stitching on these, because you are going to sew along the top eventually, and you're going to sew down here eventually. And I realized it really does matter. When it comes to that time, I'll show you what happened when you don't do that. To sew these together, I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.5, and I'm going to use the auto tension. Also, if you want to, you can sew here. You don't even have to cut your thread. You can turn and you can keep going. I'll show you that this time. Let's go ahead and clean up that thread, and then I'm going to sew the 2 pieces of lining fabric the exact same way. The next step is going to be to box these corners. So we are going to go ahead and open those up just like this. Try to make sure that your sides line up correctly. Even though I'm going to take the clips off in a minute, I like to put clips on it first on both sides. And then you want to make sure that these two are coming up together in the right place. So pretty side to pretty side, and try to have them line up as best as possible. Now, you have an issue with these two pieces of fabric. What I have learned that I like to do is have one pulled this way and one pulled that way. Afterwards, you can clip off the excess if you want to, but I never have. So we're going to clip all this together. We're going to sew along this way and then this way. We'll do that on all four corners. So the two corners of the lining fabric as well as the two corners of the outside fabric. Now earlier I mentioned if you don't come all the way down and then backstitch back, what can happen is these stitches can start to come loose and it makes it a whole lot harder to do this process. So it's not as important up here because we are going to sew over that in a little bit. But down here I have found that it's important to go ahead and come all the way down and do a little back stitch to hold those stitches tight. Down here I'm going to continue using the side of my presser foot, that 3/8 seam allowance. Make sure that your fabric isn't kind of bunched up under there. So I'll do a couple stitches forward, go backwards, come all the way to this center line. So I'm going to watch for where my needle comes across this center line. Then I'm going to go ahead and lift my presser foot while the needle's down, pivot, and come back this way. Let me show you what I just did. I made it where the corners on the bottom are going to be boxy. So I'll go ahead and flip this right side out. I want to press out those corners, get them nice and sharp. If I want to, I can go ahead and iron across that. And I probably will before I add this to my outside fabric. But we just successfully boxed those corners. I'm going to do the exact same thing on the outside pieces. I poked out my corners and I think that looks perfectly acceptable, but I want to iron my seams. Now this fusible fleece does not iron exceptionally well, but it's definitely going to help get this smoother. So I'm just going to hold that on there and press it for about 5 seconds. I'll go all the way around the basket. I'll do the lining part, and then we'll pick back up. Now what I want to do is go ahead and take where the bottom is and press it as well. So make sure those corners are poked out nice. And I'll press it from the top side and I'll press it from the bottom side. The lining side, since it doesn't have that fusible fleece, it presses much easier. So at the bottoms, I'll just press from the top side. Now what we need to do is we need to have pretty sides to pretty sides. Now it doesn't matter if your lining has the pretty side out and this is flipped the other way, or if your lining is flipped the other way, because these baskets are reversible. But since the liner's easier to work with, I'm going to go ahead and flip that back inside out. Also, remember, we have two sides that are sewn on and two sides that are not. So you just need to make sure that you have the sewn side of the liner fabric to the sewn side of the outside fabric. So I'm just going to push this down inside, and there's my seam on this one, there's the seam on this one, so that's the correct way. Just push it all the way down inside. Then we're going to match up the two seams. And we'll clip those together. Let's go ahead and go to the other side, do the same thing. And just like before, I'm going to have one seam go one way and one go the other. If you wanted to, you could open them up. It's just that this fusible fleece doesn't open up well. So this is how I'm handling that issue. Once I have the side seams lined up, I'm going to go ahead and go around, make sure that these are flush at the top, and just clip them together. What we're going to do now is we're going to sew all the way around, except we're going to leave about a 2.5 inch gap so that I can actually turn this right side out when the time comes for that. So I have everything lined up at the top. I'm going to go ahead and remove this piece from my sewing machine. It'll be much easier to sew this way. Otherwise, you are really trying to maneuver this to the right spot, and it can be more difficult. So I like to remove that extra piece. If you think you might forget to leave a 2 or 2.5 inch gap, you can go ahead and mark it, but I think I'll be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and start short of that seam. This time I am going to use a larger seam allowance because eventually it's going to flip down over itself and we're going to top stitch it. So I want to make sure that I have enough fabric folded over, you'll see what I mean in a minute, to be able to top stitch it. So I'm going to pull it all the way out here to this line. And I think that's 3/4 of an inch on my machine. So I'm going to try to stay consistent all the way around with that 3/4 inch seam allowance. All right. Also, because eventually there's going to be some pretty good tug on these stitches, when I turn it right side out, I'm going to make sure that I do a back stitch here. Now we can see our other piece right here. That looks pretty good. Let me go ahead and do a back stitch, come back forward, lift it up, and trim it off. Now's where this basket really starts taking shape. So I'm going to find my opening, and I'm just going to go down to a corner, and I'm going to start pulling out some of this fabric. Be a little bit gentle because you can pop those stitches. Let's go ahead and get some of the lining coming through as well. And then you can start pushing from the outside. Whoops! You can start pushing from the outside to get that to come through just even a little bit more easily. Or actually, I guess I'm pushing on the inside to push it outside. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and leave these apart. I want to go in through this opening, box out those corners again. We'll go down into the other side, make sure those are boxed out. Everything looks pretty good, so now let's go ahead and just tuck our lining inside. Now it will take a little bit of time to straighten this part out. I am going to press across there. That's going to give you a much more finished look. And this is why we're top stitching, so that we can close this gap up. So I like to try to roll up the seam so that your fabrics meet at the very tip top. And honestly, I think getting these seams to meet up at the top is probably the hardest thing of the project. Now let's go ahead and start pressing that. Now, if you want to, you could use some hem tape, some Stitch Witch, some Heat and Bond, and you could press this down first before you sew this. I typically don't do that, but you could do that if you'd like to. Even though these are reversible, if you know that the way you want it is to have the purple folded over, then it doesn't hurt to have the purple a little higher than the main fabric. But if you plan to use it truly as a reversible basket, It does make a difference. For the top stitch, I'm going to go ahead and use that 3/8 inch side of the presser foot. I want to increase my stitch length to 3.5. Now this can be a little bit difficult in these seams, and so I'm just hand cranking the wheel, and I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of stitches that way so that I get off that really bulky area. If you're going to break a needle, that's probably where it's going to happen. Okay, I feel like I'm past it enough. Once I get all the way back around, I'll go past it a little bit because I didn't top stitch here. But your top stitch isn't going to have a lot of pressure against it, so back stitching isn't quite as important here. Now that I'm getting close to this bulky side, I'm going to go ahead and kind of help the machine by hand cranking as well as pushing the pedal. Now before I sew over that, I want to go ahead and clip away this excess thread. Just keep it nice and neat. And then I want to try to really match up with that. And we are done with all of our stitches. I'm going to go ahead and press this one more time, then I'll flip it out and show you just how cute this turned out. Look at how cute this turned out. I just love it. It is adorable. Love, love, love it. So thanks again for joining me today. If you have any questions, comments, or even suggestions for me, leave them in the comment section below. Remember, if you want to use the interfacing or fusible fleece that I did, I'll put that in the video description. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until my next video, bye-bye.